All right, man, I'm gonna tell you what's up. Welcome back to the channel. We're gonna talk a little bit about whether Monero is undervalued today. We're gonna go into some theories and we're gonna go into some stats, and we'll make a case as to why we believe it's undervalued. Non-investment advice, tax advice, whatever, blah blah blah. But here's Monerica. Always good stuff on there. Love giving them a shout out. Monero, CPA, xsmartchat.com. You can leave a super chat or a tip there. I'll give you a shout out in the next video based on what you post. Nothing new here. So we can kind of just jump right into the content. But also we created a new Monero Chamber of Commerce X page. So if you are interested in kind of getting an idea as to what people are talking about in regards to the latest on Monero business adoption, you can jump in there. Ideally, we want the conversation to be strictly business oriented. Right now, you can just go join. There's no restrictions, but at some point, because of the lack of restrictions, we'll probably get a bunch of people start talking about random stuff. We don't really want that. There are plenty of other Monero X pages you could go to do that. There's the Monero Society, there's the Monero page, but this is specifically for businesses. So if you run a Monero business, if you're intending on running a Monero business, and when I say Monero business, like you accept Monero, maybe you pay Monero for inventory or whatever, you're just involved in some kind of way. This is a good place to network. We have good stuff here going on already. It's only been up for a day, and we have 140 members. It's pretty amazing. But we've got web scrubbing services. We've got web design services already in here. Encrypted mail servers. Um, you know, nonprofit privacy guides. That's pretty cool. People talking about business development, technologies. That's pretty cool. Point of sale systems. Um, we've got a lot of stuff going on here. People selling metals from Monero on here, so it's pretty cool. And of course, Vic with CakePay made a shout. So go check this out. Lots of good stuff. Lots of good stuff to come. And the more people that we have in here, the more that's going to kind of allow us to hone in on best practices and stuff like that. And we're very early still in this stage of Monero business adoption and development. And I suspect that we're at the very bottom of an S curve. I'm talking with wallet providers on how to integrate accounting features into their wallets to make the accounting for this stuff a little bit easier, because there is that whole gain and loss factor which trips people up. But we also have other technologies coming which are going to make the adoption a little bit easier. Full chain membership proofs is going to give us in and out view keys. There's a lot of cool things coming that are in the works that are going to make Monero a really good currency to use as a business. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, but join the Monero Chamber of Commerce. It's a fun place to be. Tux and Doug and myself are mods, and so it's a cool organization. If you have any suggestions as to how to improve our page here, make it better, you're free to DM me, Tux, or Doug, and we could help to do that. So, just wanted to give that a shout. But what kind of inspired my idea that Monero is undervalued, aside from the last 5 years of videos that I've done saying Monero is undervalued? Well, at least today we saw Zero Hedge come out with a statement, actually from Michael Harnett, who's one of these guys at one of these investment firms, who comments on the state of the markets. And he said, quote, "Do I buy treasuries when the government owes $38 trillion, corporate bonds with spreads at 20 years lows, stocks trading on a 40x cap, or gold that's just gone vertical?" Tricky. And it is tricky out there to figure out where to put your money. Real estate is another one of those things that's just tremendously overvalued. I've got to make a video on that, because recently I was looking at houses in the northern part of the state that I'm in, which is Georgia. I'll just tell you. I was looking at homes like more or less near the Tennessee border, because I don't want to live in the city. I'm not trying to do that. And apparently, there are some cheaper properties in the city, but obviously, you pay for that because you're living around unamenable demographics, for instance. And generally, it's just a little bit less pleasant, and traffic and negative externalities all over the place with living in the city. So I looked at something that was, in the northern part of the state, a little bit more rural. Starter homes are like $400,000, $500,000. Okay. I don't know who the heck can afford this stuff. Presumably big real estate company firms, BlackRock and whoever, but real estate just seems overvalued. It's kind of hard to park your money there. And then also you have everything else just at all-time highs. So treasuries, everyone says they're risk-free assets. A lot of these treasuries are yielding negative. So it's funny that people call them risk-free assets. I guess you know that you're losing money by investing in some of these treasuries. And of course, that's the case mostly all over the world, like in Europe. If you buy European sovereign debt, in many cases, the inflation is more than the interest that you're receiving in nominal terms. And so, as a real rate, you're receiving negative money. You can't keep your money in cash because the US dollar lost 10% of its value over the last year. And of course, you look at gold versus all the other currencies, fiat worldwide, it's just exploding. Same thing with silver. And you look at gold and silver, it's like, okay, is this overvalued? How about the corporate bonds and the stocks? With corporate bonds and stocks, you have retirement accounts just shoveling money into these things, not really thinking about PE ratios and valuation metrics. It's just like you have these big indices where all this money just flows in because people need a place to put their tax-free money and they're trying to escape the tax system, right? So all of this tax-free incentivized money is flowing into these areas, which is rapidly overshooting the proper valuations of a lot of these things. And so where do you put the money? That is a big question. And in my opinion, I think Monero is honestly just the again, not investment advice, but I think it really is the best place to put your cash. Um, we're having decent returns here in Monero. I don't know what it is up on the year. I think it's just about equivalent to Bitcoin or maybe more than Bitcoin. It's done pretty well over the last year. I think it was like $150 about a year ago. Now we're at about 300 and change. I think it's about 320, so it's gone up something like 100%. And it's private money. And as the network grows, as we see more businesses accept Monero, in the ClearNet and otherwise, you're going to have more of a network effect. There are going to be more people who just want to get into this ecosystem and live in this ecosystem, which increases the money velocity, which increases the number of transactions being done, which increases the value of the network, which pulls more people in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You go up this S curve of adoption. And with the technology where it's at right now, and with the number of businesses that are starting to accept this stuff, and the number of people who are waking up to the worldwide problems of digital ID, CBDC Mark of the Beast stuff, internet anonymity laws, like taking those away. Governments are increasingly trying to get personal data on people's financial and otherwise just everyday activity. People are going to want to go into these kinds of assets that are more or less off grid. And that's one of my ideas as to why gold and silver have gone up so much. It may have to do not necessarily with the inflation, but maybe it has to do with people desiring assets that are off the grid, completely private, bare assets. And so I think Monero is incredibly undervalued because people still don't quite understand that this is the digital bearer asset that you want to go into if you're looking for privacy, if you're looking for fungibility, and you're looking to engage in a future flourishing economic system, which is parallel to this demonic system, which is overregulated and is over surveilled and so on and so forth. So and especially if we start to see a war on cash pick up, which is a trend that we've seen over the last 5 years, then this is going to be what people will want to use because the benefit of cash is that it's private. And we actually have a clip that we'll get to later here about that. Might as well just get to it now. This is somebody who I guess was on a news show talking about the rise of Monero. So check this out.
Said, should this not be banned? If it's purposely being used for nefarious means or cloaked means, give me a reason why this is being used for positive utility reasons that you wouldn't use Bitcoin for or one of the other cryptocurrencies.
If the ability to make anonymous transactions is a reason why you should ban a certain kind of money, we shouldn't ban cash because cash is totally anonymous. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies generally are in some ways a response to concerns about privacy and other things like that.
Said, should this not be banned? If it's
Exactly. And so if people get rid of cash, or they disincentivize the use of cash because they're making everybody pay with credit cards and so on and so forth. Or they just outlaw cash, or inflation makes it so that cash becomes kind of hard to spend. I remember being in Istanbul earlier this year, and the amount of cash that you had to have on you in order to pay for things was quite a lot because of the inflation that was going on there. And so easier to just use something like a Monero where you don't have to carry around a bundle of cash. And it's also a little bit more secure because if somebody goes to rob you or something, they can't necessarily get into your Monero account, and they may not even know you have Monero in the first place unless you're me. People know about me. So, that's a consideration. That's all part of the trend that we're seeing. Okay. So, in my opinion, just based on what I've said so far, I believe it's undervalued. But let's get to some more stats. This is from Doug Dimmadome. Great name. Uh, so he was looking at this thing from IMF.org here that says the average size of the shadow economy of the 158 countries over 1991 to 2015 is 31.9%. Okay. And that equates to hundreds of billions of dollars. And obviously, we're not trying to incentivize people to get involved with that. But we are saying that there is a big demand for basically shadow money, which is kind of what we're talking about with Monero. And if we're just kind of going on transaction volume, Dimmadome says so we consistently do 5% of Bitcoin's transaction volume, and you think fair value is 0.28% of Bitcoin. There's a clear value gap here, and he's doing a debate with these people, and we'll get to this quote from Opportunity from Chaos up here, but he says there's a clear value gap here. Well, there's a lot of speculation in Bitcoin, okay? Pretty much all of it's speculation, in my opinion. So we can't just go based off transaction volume, especially because a lot of the transactions that people are doing with Bitcoin aren't necessarily economic transactions. They're just transferring Bitcoins between wallets and stuff like that. Same could be the case for Monero, but I think on a percentage basis, we do have a lot more economically valuable transactions taking place in the network as opposed to Bitcoin, which usually is just, I mean, they say on their own Twitter page now, it is trackable digital gold. And they actually added the word trackable recently, which is nice to see because it seems like they're actually submitting to what it is they have always been. And there was a battle that went on for years as to whether or not Bitcoin is private and fungible, but evidently they're kind of submitting to what it is that they actually are. But I would still challenge the whole digital gold thing because what makes gold gold is the fact that it's actually not digital. It has certain elemental properties that are unique to its chemical composition and so on and so forth. And we don't have to get into all that. But he says we don't need Starbucks to accept Monero for coffee. We need to capture about 0.1% of the global shadow economy to command 10K a coin. Okay. And so another another thing that's going on and something to consider is let's say that we start to have a lot of these businesses come on board in the regulated normal economy, right? We start to have a lot of cash-based businesses like service businesses, like blue-collar business come on board. We start to see a lot of food, for instance, start to be accepted for Monero. We start to see a lot of different services, online and otherwise, accept Monero. Lots of goods that people can ship out, pieces of art, so on and so forth that people can sell. I mean, I don't have a lot of Monero which is paid to me in my business because I'm an accountant and people want their deductions for paying me and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to a lot of different things that are sold, there would be a great demand from people who are maybe not able to more easily get into the regulated economy because of the nature of their business and their existence or whatever it is they do. And so there would be a demand from those people to get into the regulated economy and get goods and services from that economy because they have all this underground capital that is otherwise maybe difficult for them to exchange into the normal economy, particularly because of banking regulations, maybe as a result of the lack of um, off ramps with Monero. It's a little bit difficult to sell large quantities of Monero increasingly because of the delistings on exchanges. And so increasingly, they're trying to get into the regulated economy through the provision of goods and services. And this is one of the arguments as to why it's good that Monero is actually delisted from exchanges, is because it actually made it so that the off ramps weren't necessarily exchanges that just exchange the Monero for cash or another crypto, but actually it's goods and services. And again, this is why I'm just aghast that we don't have more businesses, even though this page is exploding. I'm aghast that people haven't connected this yet. Where it's just like, if you are able to accept Monero for your business, depending on the business that you're in, you could be giving yourself a tremendous competitive advantage relative to your peers in your industry because you're opening yourself up to a particular clientele, which those people may not be available to. And so it's another kind of surprise that you don't see private equity, for instance, wise up to this fact and get the businesses that they invest in to start accepting Monero because there's a whole freaking pool of capital that is just waiting to be released into the marketplace of businesses that accept Monero. So this is another reason that I think Monero is undervalued. And guess what? It's going to be a co-evolutionary process, okay? Because the more that the regulated, um, what do we call it? Normal economy grows, the more businesses accept Monero, the more that this underground economy is going to be incentivized to move from cash to Monero, particularly with full chain membership proofs as an upgrade. Because if you have a shadow business, for instance, there are a lot of benefits from having view keys. You know, you have your own hombres out there, they're doing business and they're doing cash based deals, and you can't really see whether or not they're pocketing some of that cash, doing embezzlement or whatever. And you, as a shadow run business, you can actually have a lot of internal transparency because you are using Monero, ironically, but you have a lot of external privacy more than you would have ever had before. And on full chain membership proofs, I did want to play this little skit. It's not a skit, this little clip from Monero Talk where they're talking about full chain membership proofs and how big the anonymity set's going to go in to. They say it's, you know, presumably going to. They say theoretically infinite, but I'll let them talk about it. But that's another reason it's undervalued. Let's get into that.
Kind of give us the lowdown.
Yeah, I'll give the stupid person's answer, and then I'll let Luke give a smart person's answer.
Yes, no, well, I want to go deep down this rabbit hole. So,
and Luke
perfect.
can absolutely correct my stupid person's answer. So, FCMPs is a really cool technology that is going to effectively, for those of you who don't know, allow our anonymity set to gigantically balloon from, what is it right now, 15? You know, 15 ring member? I forget exactly what it is.
16.
Yeah, something along there. To basically every other transaction that has used the full chain membership proofs technology ever in the history of Monero. So like for every transaction that goes out, that anonymity set just increased by one and another and another and another and another. So no longer are we locked into 16. We have a theoretical infinite number. And it's, you know, just the more people use Monero, the better the anonymity set gets. This has always been possible to us in theory. Nothing stopped us from editing the code and saying ring signature size equals 1,000. The problem with doing that is that it balloons the transaction size, meaning every Monero transaction, instead of being kilobytes, may be, you know, hundreds of kilobytes or thousands or what have you. So every time you sync the chain, you have to download a massive, it's going to take a lot of hardware on your it's a lot of space on your hard drive. It's going to take a lot of bandwidth. Just syncing the chain is going to be a nightmare. Some people on weaker hardware actually wouldn't be able to sync the chain at all. And then you won't be able to mine, you won't be able to send, you know, whatever. Nothing stopped us from doing that except the reality that it would pretty much just crash the Monero network. The cool thing about FCMPs is it allows us to, instead of having a linear increase, it allows us to have a logarithmic increase, where basically it will still go up. The average transaction will still go up in size, but it tails off. So we start reaching kind of a maximum that it will go up. And once again, Luke can expand on the details here.
So they're saying that it's like theoretically infinite, which is crazy. So interesting points from Doug there. Obviously, we're not trying to endorse any kind of money laundering with Monero or illegal activity. But we're just exploring the dynamics of kind of what's going on here, and obviously certain things are going to be hard to stop. So this is Crassus Clay. This is kind of a Moon Boy post, but you know, I, I still think it's kind of on the point. Your only hope of going back in time and buying Bitcoin at $300 is with Monero today. It's so gay when people say, I wish I bought Bitcoin back then, yet when they have redemption in front of them, that's fundamentally better, stronger, more undervalued, they turn into Helen Keller, blind when the play is in front of them every time. Yeah, I also, um, there's also a post by somebody, I forgot who they were, but they were basically like, if you were the kind of person to doubt Bitcoin at 2013, then you're probably the same person who's doubting Monero today. Now, I doubted Bitcoin when I first heard about it because, unfortunately, I guess for me, I figured out that it was trackable and traceable pretty much upon my initial inquiry into it. And so that dissuaded me from it. And instead, I opted for physical gold and silver, which I'm not too displeasured by, but it certainly yielded much less than Bitcoin. But this is just so much more sure of a play. I think it's so much more sure of a play because of the whole privacy thing. I mean, this really changes the world. I mean, I don't think people really quite understand what's going to happen game theory wise when this stuff starts to take off. You start to have businesses start to accept this stuff. You start to have business to business transactions. Peer to peer transactions are already pretty much covered by Monero at the moment. But once we start going into business to business, and, you know, as the connections between the regulated and unregulated economies start to bridge together because of the amount of flows and activities that are taking place cross chain, interchain, and otherwise. Again, I've said this many times, but a trickle will turn into a flood, and this is just the nature, I think, of dynamics regarding the growth of networks and dynamics regarding the physics of kind of what we're getting into here. It's almost like we're observing a physical phenomenon. You see this just repeated throughout all the courses of nature. A tree starts out as a seed, it grows into a stump, and then it branches out into many different forms of networks. Life breathes through it. And it's the same thing with drops of water that turn into a puddle that then turn into kind of like a tributary where it like networks itself out. This is kind of just one of those things. And it's much more likely to happen because you can't build all of these walls that contain the flows, right? And that's what they've done successfully when they hijacked Bitcoin. They're able to box it off. That's why it's a store of value now instead of a particularly proper cryptocurrency, is because they're able to box it off. And while they boxed it off, they were able to then build their own parallel networks in the form of Tether, USDC, all these stable coins, Google Pay, Apple Pay, Venmo, Zelle, all these things, which now make peer to peer monetary transactions way easier than it did for Bitcoin. Plus, you're dealing with the US dollar, and then they also constructed the tax system around Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which made it so that there is regulatory and reporting overhead for using them. And again, it just dissuaded the flows from happening in regards to the natural response to a corrupt financial system away from that system, which is trying to box everybody into a digital concentration camp panopticon. So, in regards to Monero, there is a much more high capacity for those kinds of flows to actually live, develop, and grow. And again, I think we're at the beginning of this S curve where once we start to see a lot of adoption, whether it's in the regulated or unregulated economies, and we already see it a lot in the unregulated economies because of the darknet marketplaces, we're just going to see just a blossoming happen that will be very hard for anybody to stop once it starts. And I'm not sure if governments are really paying much attention to this. And if I were them, I would. But maybe they're going to be late to the party, man, because once this starts to happen, again, it'll be very hard to stop. And right now we have a window open to where this thing can really get pushed forward. And I see why Xenu and other people like that are kind of, being anti Moon Boy, for instance, because when you're a Moon Boy, you're inclined to just kind of follow the steps of the Bitcoin bros into the digital concentration camp where you just kind of hold this stuff and you don't necessarily incentivize the flow of it, the development of the networks, and the building of this kind of economy, which makes the monetary flows bring value to the currency, if that makes sense. Things have to be a medium of exchange before they properly become a store of value. And this is ultimately the problem with what we see with Zcash. And I hate to bring this frickin' coin up again. We've talked about it and we've beat this subject to death over the last few videos. But the problem with Zcash, especially when you get into conversations with these people, is they're so focused on the tech, but they're not focused on the development of the ecosystem. They're not very focused on the development of the business side of things. It's very much like, our tech is better than your tech, therefore we're going to win. Where it's just like, obviously, that's not how this works. And the more that they follow that narrative and the more that they believe that that's how things are going to pan out, the more that Monero is more likely to succeed and beat out Zcash because of that perspective, which is a loser perspective. It's not necessarily about how good your tech is or how good your product is. It's how effective are you at bringing it out into global adoption. And Monero is so far ahead of Zcash, it's not even funny. We went through a video just a couple videos ago talking about how Monero does 200 times more transactions than Zcash currently at the moment. There were a number of vendors who said that we've received a lot of Monero transactions. We've received exactly 0 Zcash transactions. Now, if they start to reorient themselves and they start to really focus on what matters, which is business adoption, then in my opinion, that'll change the dynamic a little bit. But they're not even thinking about that. Everything is so like focused on the tech side, which is a very big problem that you see in cryptocurrency, generally speaking. And I was talking about this with Alaska and on actually, which is that people are just not focused on the business side of things and they don't understand the value of that. Um, it's amazing to me that, and I'm not putting any wallets down or anything like that. Everyone's doing the best they can, but the fact that, nobody's getting onto this accounting thing, like making the accounting for receiving and spending Monero easier inter-wallet is indicative of this overarching problem. You have to make it easy for people to use. Otherwise, they're not going to use it. They don't care how good the tech is. People are they take the path of least resistance. People are kind of like the drops of water that I had mentioned before. People follow the path of least resistance and they kind of form networks into things, even if those things in the aggregate and in the long run are not going to be good for them. Okay. Which is why we have to really focus on making things user friendly, business friendly, and easy. And I think that, again, is one of those things that we're working on at the moment that when we really get right, we're going to be able to expedite the adoption curve. So, this is what Opportunity from Chaos says. He says, the effort being expended to steer people into Zcash is crazy. We're at the beginning phase of Monero adoption. I agree. Certain players know that they can't stop privacy cryptocurrency. They just want to steer the public into Zcash so that the public doesn't all end up in Monero. I'm insanely bullish on Monero because of this, right? And I do think that is kind of what's going on. I said that in a prior video, a couple of videos ago, that it is highly suspicious that we're about to have full chain membership proofs. There's this kind of blossoming flowering of the Monero ecosystem at the moment. Lots of businesses are starting to accept this stuff. Monerica's exploding, XMR Bazaar is exploding. And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, everyone's talking about some so-called revenge trade, which is ridiculous, by the way. I think I have this pulled up on my X profile. You can follow me, Monero Mateo, right here. But this guy was like, Zeke, okay, this is a very popular post, almost 340,000 impressions. And of course, the top comment is you meant Monero instead of Zcash, but he says, this is Ansem, BL Noise, whatever. Zcash is basically revenge against everything. And we've said for years that Monero is the revolution against the Bitcoin revolution. But he says corruption, governments, and surveillance states, bankers, VC slop, hedge funds that have polluted this space. Bitcoin and crypto in general has largely abandoned its cypherpunk ideals, run it to zillions with haste. And if you've watched my videos on the digital currency group, which is one of the primary investors in Zcash, you'll find that it's actually boarded by prior Federal Reserve uh, board members. You got Larry Summers on there, who is an ex-Treasury Secretary under the Clinton administration, definitely a swamp creature. We went through a couple videos ago. You've got DARPA and other Israeli institutions who are involved in the development of Zcash. And then the primary developer is the Electric Coin Company, which is a company which has Zuko as a CEO, which is actually funded by the venture capitalist he seems to be hating on in this particular tweet. So this all seems a little bizarre to me. This whole push, I kind of agree with where our friend here is coming from. Opportunity from chaos. It seems a little bit inorganic. But again, if they focus on the tech side of things, but they're not going to focus on the business adoption side of things, then they're just not going to get anywhere. And all this talk about we're going to pass Monero market cap, you may, but it's not going to mean much of anything. It's just going to be equivalent to a kind of pump. And we're not really interested in that. I think most people who are in Monero are interested in the higher ideals, and they're focused on actually building out this ecosystem, which is going to challenge the global monetary order. And I think that we have the technology to do that, and the technology is going to be getting better. They keep saying that we have better privacy than people in Monero. And it's like that could be the case. And some people are saying the privacy in Monero is insufficient with the ring signatures. It's worked fine. I mean, show me people that are getting arrested because they're using Monero. I haven't seen a single example. There are plenty of stories that we've read here on the channel where people are arrested and they did use Monero and they did post about that in the arrest documents or whatever, but it's usually some other OPSEC mistake that they made that led to their downfall. It actually wasn't the usage of Monero. And then that gets propagandized by people saying, oh, this person was using Monero and got arrested. It wasn't the fault of Monero, actually. So nobody could actually make the case that it was Monero that had insufficient privacy tech that led to somebody getting in trouble. Now, if you're using centralized exchanges or if you're using swap services and you're not, you know, properly timing things and stuff like that, there's a chance that somebody could figure out what's going on because you're using a KYC service. And especially if you're going from a transparent crypto into Monero, there's a chance that if they use timing analysis and they're observing the amounts going from here to there, they could heuristically figure out that you're the person doing these transactions and so forth. But, it's kind of 101 with OPSEC and crypto, right? But you know, those are all things to consider. I think that's all I want to say for today. So I think Monero indeed is pretty undervalued. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, leave a super chat, xsmartchat.com/MoneroCPA. Like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Let me know what you think. My name is Mateo. God bless. See you in the next one.